Welcome to the Life Expansion After 50 podcast. Today's episode will be about the cue or stimulus step of the expanded stimulus response cycle. And this is something that's proprietary for me. Using the expanded stimulus response cycle, which I will review in a few minutes, I'll illustrate how we can make the shift from have, do, be to be, do, have. You know how when you're scrolling through social media or reading a self-help book and you think, that's great advice, but it never seems to work for me. This life expansion work is for everyone, but I would say everyone is not ready for it. It's for the person who knows deep down that they didn't come this far just to come this far. It's also for the person who hasn't yet taken that first step. You may feel paralyzed by fear or doubt, but you know in your heart, your heart is calling you towards purpose, growth, self-actualization. As I said, starting the journey isn't for everyone. Staying in your comfort zone, the space between your upper and lower limits, might feel safe, but over time, that zone can turn into a rut. You know how when you stay too long in that rut, it feels harder and harder to climb out? And while you can climb out, the longer you stay, the harder it gets. What will you learn today? We'll begin with a quick review of the foundational topics that we've explored so far. Beliefs, the stories that you tell yourself and how they shape your world. The next one is neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to change and adapt to new patterns. So the brain we're born with is not the brain we're going to die with, or it doesn't have to be. And much of these things that you think are out of reach for you or not available to you, it's simply because the way you are wired right now is not set up for this. Now, in order to figure it out, we've got to deconstruct it and then put it back together in a way that's designed for your life. And we do that with neuroplasticity. Typically, people think about neuroplasticity as happening in the second half of the stimulus response cycle. So the first half is pre-stimulus. The second half is the actual stimulus to the response. The prior 4 episodes, those were the pre-stimulus. The next one is priming, how your environment and focus shape your actions. But it's interesting, priming can come from external, it can come from internal, smells can create priming, anchors. There's so many ways that we can be hit with priming, and I went down that path of priming and cognitive biases in earlier episodes. It's so vast, it's so big, you can't train to it. What you have to do is condition in the right response. So we condition in a different response than was wired from 0 to 7, so that in your being, you're just doing automatically the right things. The next one was growth mindset. So that's the fourth of the 4 steps. Growth mindset, the foundation for resilience and continuous improvement. And a big point about growth mindset is people don't realize you can be triggered into a fixed mindset in an instant. And you can have a growth mindset about a topic, say a book, and you can have a growth mindset about most of the chapters in that book, but you can have a fixed mindset about a couple of the chapters. And similarly, you can have a growth mindset about the book and the chapters, but there's a few paragraphs in one of those chapters that you have a fixed mindset about. All it takes is a fixed mindset on one little small part, and it can stop you in your tracks because it's a fixed mindset and you don't see it being possible for you to go past that step. Now, from those 4, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, and growth mindset, we'll explore the critical 5th step, resetting your stimulus response cycle. That's the next 4 steps. Have you ever noticed how certain habits or reactions seem to run on autopilot, no matter how much you want to change them? This is where everything changes. You'll discover how to build automatic habits. I call it automaticity, putting automaticity to work for you. It's not that it was working against you, it was working for a different time and place. It was based on your 0 to 7 conditioning, figured out a little bit more from 8 to 18, operationalized and turned into your model of the world with the prefrontal cortex and its 20 billion neurons from 19 to 27. But that's a different world. Now, if you were born 500 years ago, your 0 to 7 world is probably not that different from your 45-year-old world. But today, think about it. Moore's Law instated in 1970, 67 or so, that we're going to double technology capability every 12 months. It was later adjusted to every 18 months. It's probably back to 12 months now. But we are on, if you think about a compounding curve, we are on that super steep part. We're in that vertical part of that compounding curve. That's why the VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, is every day you wake up, it's something different. It's just so much out there, that arcing of that Moore's law curve. And now that compounding is, we are here. And with artificial intelligence programming the next apps, and those apps are programming the future ones after that, you know it's going to be moving fast. So we have to have a different approach. This is necessary, I say now, because what you've always done won't work. And now it'll work if you want to stay in that zone, but that's going to become a rut. And I think there's a place there. I'm not saying that there's no hating here, right? But if you are called to do more, if you are listening to the calling of your heart, you're going to have to shift how you approach this. And that's why we make the shift from have, do, be to be, do, have. So you'll discover how to build automatic habits that align with your vision, making your aspirations not just possible, but inevitable. The time to act is now, not because it's easy. It isn't. This journey requires you to confront the survival mechanisms you've relied on your whole life. But here's the truth. Those mechanisms were designed to keep you safe, not to help you thrive. And they were designed to keep you safe in a past world, so to speak. Have you ever felt like you're waiting for the right time to pursue your dreams, only to realize that time never comes? If you've ever felt that your vision is out of reach, I want you to know that's not true. What you desire is closer than you think. But the chasm to get there is scary. It's not difficult. It's not like climbing a mountain, but it's scary because you're facing the things that you've avoided, for some of us, decades. You simply need the tools to step into your potential, to take charge of your agency, and to design a life that you love. So are you ready to say goodbye to self-sabotage, to break free from the habits and beliefs that no longer serve you, to finally step into the life you've been dreaming of? Let's get started. Your hero's journey begins today. So as I said, we talked about, in the last 4 episodes, I talked about beliefs, and I combined it with condition. And then I went to neuroplasticity and then priming. And then last week we talked about the growth mindset. If we have those 4 boxes up here, and I'm going to simplify it by calling it belief. I explore it a little bit more, but the point is, these things, this is like looking into that pot of spaghetti. You can put any one of them in front of the other. So beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, and then growth mindset. You can put any one of them in front of the other. As I change this, my beliefs get easier to change. As I change my beliefs, neuroplasticity gets easier. Depending on my priming, I may access different beliefs. Depending on my priming, I may or may not be able to access neuroplasticity. My mindset can affect all of these. All of these can affect the mindset. So this is a loop. Now, when I talk about making the shift from have, do, be to be, do, have, if you've been involved in personal development over the last couple of decades, you've probably heard a lot about state. You can say that people say you have to be in the right state. I would say when you're in the right state, you have your butterflies flying in formation. Your ducks are in a row. And because of the way physiology works, we can get to that state by doing things physically, right? We can push ourselves. We can jump around. We can listen to music. You know, I talked last week, I have an anchor. When I get up to speak, I have an anchor that I fire off, and that puts me into that state. But that's temporary, and it's sort of artificial. And if you're not at that next level, you can still be knocked out of state. And once you get knocked out of state, and this has happened, you've actually seen this happen with people, fighters. It's good, you watch fighters where, Mike Tyson has said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. You can see sometimes when a person's state just shifts. Then, I like to talk about the Navy SEALs and the Rangers, because I was trained as an Army Ranger. I also trained with Navy SEALs. And it's interesting because this community, they get knocked in the face. It doesn't change their state. They just keep going with the same thing. You can take them out completely before you see the state change. Why? Because they have moved beyond that. You could say that they are in a state of being. Hopefully you can see the state of being as different from state. Where I want to take it, in order to live the life that you're designing and to love living that life, you actually have to take that next step into being. And the next step into being is why we have the shift from have, do, be to be, do, have. So being, we're not human doings, right? We're human beings. Now, if you think about, if I said to you, think about a person who you look up to as a great quote, blank, whatever that is for you. If you're a speaker, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, if you're an entrepreneur, there's somebody who embodies what you want to become. They just have everything there. You can probably think of that person. For most of them, I would say they are being. Now, there are other people who have stage presence, and when they're on stage, they're one thing, but when they get off stage, they're something different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these people who are just being. That's just who they are. It exudes from them. That is the being that I'm talking about. And it's a set of habits. It's looking into that pot of spaghetti and organizing all of those strands into a way that serves this. The way they're set up today made sense when you were 10 years old. This is the thing, you are what you were when you were 10. That's been around for decades, long before we started talking about 0 to 7. Back then we were talking about 0 to 3, that most of your habits are formed, but it's really 0 to 7. But when you are what you were when you were 10, that's so old, it was well before that. But it's because if you look at who a person is at 10 years old, and you look at the headlines that were out there and the narratives that were out there when they were 10, you can see the synchronicity there. But it's not just about being. This is the be. And that's what those first 4 steps are about. The second way I want to look at this is, now let's say that we have these 4 steps, right? We have the beliefs, we have the neuroplasticity, we have the priming, and we have the mindset. What we're doing in this program, because it's like the spaghetti, and it's bit by bit, and the more you take out, the more you learn about it. And if you're taking off, imagine trying to take each one out without breaking the strand, right? You're trying to take each spaghetti strand out. So this, to me, is a good metaphor for it, because that's what it feels like sometimes, which is why self-coaching, while it's achievable, once you've gotten through this, I think is difficult without it, because this just too interconnected. What we want to do is run laps around this. And I talk about it in my 7 fitness areas. I talk about it as running laps around the first 4, mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, which covers the be and the do. And then the have is the relationships, professional, and financial. Too many people start with what they want to have, and then they never get there because there's too many obstacles. As I said, it's like this thing of spaghetti. And if you think about the mental, physical, spiritual, as I talk about in the 7 fitness series, what we're doing is upgrading our, I'll call it character, but maybe it's our essence, to be prepared for that next thing that we want to have, right? And because we have to do some things to get there. So the idea here is that we're never done. We're always going up. We're always going up. And with VUCA, the volatility and uncertainty, etc., it's always going to be hitting us. We have to have a consistent strategy where you're going along operationally, and then it's time to make an adjustment. That's your pivot. That's your project. And then you kind of go along operationally, and you're getting ad fatigue, and you make a pivot. You change. That's your project. That's your pivot. And then you go along. That's how the arc of going up actually works. It's not a straight line. It's kind of like this, but if you think about it like this, it makes sense, because you're going to focus on operational excellence, and then you're going to do projects. Some people try to do operational excellence way, way too long, and now they need a major change. What we want to do is make these shifts when they're just pivots. And I call a pivot anywhere in between, if you think about a clock face, from about 11 to 1, roughly in there. That's a nice little range where you can maintain your momentum by doing these shifts. If you go too far, imagine on the clock face you're going 12 o'clock, and you've got to make a direction change all the way to 7 o'clock. That's too much. You got to give up all your momentum. Even going to 9 o'clock, you have to give up your momentum. Think about a car or a motorcycle, bicycle driving down the road. In order to make a 90-degree turn, you have to slow down to almost single digits. But if you make those shifts from just 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock, you can maintain your momentum in there. We're going to keep spiraling up. We're going to keep spiraling up, and eventually you get to the prize. But I don't think this is a once and done, because once you get there, you'll see the next opportunity, because we are about life expansion. We are about living into that same life force that keeps us alive and keeps everything around us alive. That's what we want. Too often what we get is the mindset gets a little bit off and we take a downward spiral. Next thing you know, a belief is kicked in, a belief that, by the way, has no references that are valid today. That's why we spend some time on beliefs and references. Next thing you know, you're spiraling. Neuroplasticity goes both ways. I would say a phobia is a great example of neuroplasticity. If you have a situation where you were passed over or where you were, let's say, fired or something like that, or you lost a big sale, you could actually create a neural pathway around it. The more you think about it and replay it and replay it and replay it, you can build some neuroplasticity around that. And the next time something that comes in that's kind of like that, the priming kicks in, it throws you back off course. So you got your priming, you got your neuroplasticity. If these things are not serving, what they are doing is serving a downward spiral. And that downward spiral leads to this point where you say, where that voice, the voice that has been the thorn in your side, see, I told you so, and now it's reinforced. If this happens to somebody in their 30s or their 40s or their 50s, it explains why at 50 years old, they're just like, I'm not interested. What got me going on self-actualization when I trained in the neural change practitioner, even with neuro-linguistic programming 40 years ago, I did the training with a lot of people who were psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors. And what was interesting is how many of them, when I would mention self-actualization, would wish that they could do that. They would wish that they could access that. And these are people in the field. And I said, well, everybody needs this. That's why I said it's for everyone, but everyone is not ready to take the journey. And sometimes we have to do a few laps even to be able to have the conversation. The next 4 steps, which we have the stimulus, we have the reaction, we have the response, and we have the emotional modulation. Notice I didn't say stimulus response. I said stimulus reaction response. I am not in the business of changing the actual wiring. That's how we're structured, like the whole neural pathways, all of that. I mean, obviously with neuroplasticity, you're wrapping new neural pathways with myelin. But the stimulus response and the action, that's like the engine and the transmission in a car. We want to make the car go faster. We're going to work on the engine. We may change the gear ratios in the transmission. But the basic engine and the transmission, that is it. But when you start talking about what we do change, it's the arrow. We have a positivity exercise. Positivity, I'll call it training. You see, this from stimulus to reaction is somewhere between 200 and 400 milliseconds. So think like 0.2 of a second to 0.4 of a second. So less than a half of a second, we have that stimulus reaction. Most people who try to change their behavior are attempting to change it here. And the thing is, it's just too fast. Now, why is it too fast? Because the subconscious can process at 11 million bits per second. The conscious mind can process at 50 bits per second. That's right. Imagine that. 11 million bits per second. So in 0.4 of a second, the amount that can be processed by the subconscious, which is where the stimulus reaction is happening, is so significant that the conscious mind doesn't have a chance. This is why we say the subconscious has the tactical advantage over the mind. So what we have to do is we have to literally retrain the stimulus reaction. We literally retrain it. Again, I'm not changing what happens with the stimulus, and I'm not changing the actual reaction. What I'm doing is training it to look at something different. So for example, if you've ever been on a bike path, maybe going past a dog who's in training, you might see the trainer stop the dog, they'll make them sit, and they'll make the dog look at them. I've seen them turn their head and make them look at them. or they just have the dog look at me, look, and they've trained that in because they don't want the dog focusing on all the things that are going on in the bike path, right? And so what you have to do is retrain the stimulus response processing to, it's not look at me, it's look at my vision, look at my purpose, look at what this means to me. That's the step that we do here. And that's what we'll be talking about that becomes the first step. I know that I'm calling the stimulus the first step, but I just want to make that clarification that it's really going to be this. Then the reaction is the reaction. And if you don't take charge of it, it could become a survival reaction, and survival reactions are almost always the wrong thing. Think about it like this. When you're calm and going along, your awareness is out. Your awareness is spread out. If you talk to people who've been in a gunfight, they talk about how it closes down. It might happen to you when you're in maybe thinking you're going to be in a car accident, it closes down. Survival responses start with this closing down. This is why you want to deep breathe. It's interesting. This makes your breathing get shallow. And the idea is that if you are, a lot of this comes from hunter-gatherer. If you're facing a tiger or you see a tiger, your breathing gets shallow, because by breathing shallow, the tiger is less likely to hear you. I mean, it's as simple as that. At least that's what the books say. Obviously, we weren't there, so who knows, but it makes sense. By deep breathing, you can push your vision out. But also, by pushing your vision out, you can relax your breathing. This stimulus response cycle goes both ways. These actions that you can take. Why? Because there's 100 billion neurons that are each connected to thousands of other neurons, and they go both ways. And so this is why you can push your vision out and relax slow down your breathing. You can slow down your breathing and push your vision out. If you keep your vision coming in, other things happen, because then you go from cortisol in your system to adrenaline in your system. And this is what happens in the fight, flight, freeze, or faint. But in the beginning, it's the cortisol just monitoring the threat. And as you start closing in, you're monitoring the threat. You're losing perspective on what's going on over here. You've got to keep that perspective, because that's where your options are. And when you come down here, see with the Serengeti tiger, the only thing you got to do is survive the tiger. None of this other stuff matters. But because the subconscious looks at a threat every day as a Serengeti tiger, every threat is like a Serengeti tiger, you're constantly on this high alert. We've got cortisol running through our system. Sometimes we're getting tripped into adrenaline. But I would argue that in a lifetime, a person probably has, generally speaking, would have single-digit existential threats that they face, Serengeti tiger level stuff. Many people have never really faced one. But everyone's trauma, in my opinion, is significant. So you can't discount it. But what we can agree on, I think, is that the second worst thing that happened to you 5 years ago, you probably can't remember. And I would say every 5 years, if I ask that question of a person, the answer would be the same. And even if you look at the worst thing that you can remember 5 years ago, was it really existential? Was it really threatening your being, your life? Or was it just a major inconvenience? You see, why do we need to have the cortisol and the adrenaline in our system harming our cells every single day, every single hour, just because we haven't figured out the being? So this training is how we do that. And I can't get into it here. I do have a event. It's out there for now. It's called High Performance Self-Coaching, and I cover it there. I would recommend you check that out. You go to my LinkedIn profile into the events section and look for High Performance Self-Coaching, and I do cover the positivity exercise there. Let's look at this step, though, this stimulus, because I don't think people realize. So first of all, we probably can all agree that there can be an internal and it can be an external. But just think about all of the different things that come in here. You have, on the senses side, you have things you see, things you hear, things you touch, things that touch you. You have things that smells. You have tastes. If you've had food poisoning, you can probably remember that you knew the instant that what it came from. Because when it goes in, there's an instant stimulus reaction that happens, and it's a shift. But you don't know what's happening. It's just your body rejecting it or starting to reject it. and or at least putting on high alert. Think about cortisol, monitoring the threat. Next thing you know, yes, this is a threat, and 𝗎𝗏, right? So that's all the senses are there. What we see, and that's a common one, obviously, what we hear, what touches us, what we touch, writing, what you write down. That's why journaling can be powerful if you especially understand journaling, not just as journaling, but as journaling as a way to help prime your being. All of this stuff, the news. This is why a lot of your success enthusiasts will say they don't watch the news. They don't want that going in. And you know, it's interesting because things revert to the mean. You focus on principles, and I talk about that in Above the Line. Once you get above the line, and I was talking about that upward trajectory and how you go operational, then pivot, operational, and pivot, you do that based on principles. You don't do it willy-nilly. You do it based on proven empirical science principles, preferably peer-reviewed, and that's when you make your adjustments. On the advertising side, people do it with metrics when they see their conversion rate slip. But a lot of people, they keep doubling down. They keep pushing it further. And, you know, I was watching a thing the other day, and the guy who spent $400,000 in advertising had not made one sale. And the coach said, well, what were you thinking? I know people who, if it doesn't return in the first day or two, they cancel it. They go to another one. They go to another one because the one that hits makes up for it. And copywriting people know that. They have the control, and they're constantly measuring against the control. And with artificial intelligence now writing so many headlines, I think every headline, every ad, it has to be on trial for its life. You give it 2 or 3 days, tweak it 2 or 3 days, but you're testing it against a metric. And that's what I'm talking about, the principle. So when you're above the line, you want to be looking at your KPIs. Those are external, and you can start getting to the point where you're trained that when you see the KPI do this, then you do that. But what about the internal side? The internal side, you have your thoughts, right? The intrusive thoughts, the voices in your head, the voices from your parents, from your teachers, from the bullies, all of those. And you have your beliefs. The beliefs come up, and you have your ideas of what things match or what things mean. And because we have associations, you can link up things that aren't really connected, and you create these associations. And that's what's happening in the stimulus. The stimulus kicks off a series of associations. So what happens is, in that 11 million bits that it can process per second, you have these associations. And in those associations, now you have the neural pathways that are all connected with other neural pathways, not all, but neurons are connected with thousands of other neurons. And you have these associations, and those associations lead to the reaction. When we want to make a change, we change it at the association level. And here's a quick little exercise that you can do so I can illustrate this, because again, I can't go into the entire process of what I do here. Let's say that you have a word whisker. You say or you say or something like that. We can change that literally between now and the next time you speak. It's called a swish pattern. And what it does, you can even look it up. What it does is that it changes the association literally. So the way it works is you, as the speaker, first of all, you have to listen to yourself or watch a video, because most people don't know they say So watch a video of yourself and recognize when you say And you'll see that there's a pattern. You don't even have to watch yourself. Just think about that person who speaks that you're around and watch the pattern. You can almost predict at a 70% accuracy rate when they're going to say again, because it's one thing triggers the next, and it triggers it. You see it coming. You can see it coming. Watch TV for a bit, news shows. Obviously, actors and TV shows like that, they get that out of there. But when you're watching news, especially people who aren't used to being on camera. So what we want to do is watch ourselves on video if you can, or if not, just use your imagination. And you want to imagine seeing yourself about to say but not seeing yourself from the external dissociative view, viewing yourself. You want to view yourself from your own eyes. So in other words, you are looking out at people or some screen or something, and you might be able to see, if you look down, you might be able to see your nose. And I want you to think about having a picture of what you see milliseconds, like a half a second or a quarter of a second before you say So what is it that you're seeing just before you say What is it that you're feeling, right? What is it that you're sensing? So we're getting the kinesthetic, you're getting the visual. Maybe what is it that you're hearing? You're hearing your words. Maybe the words start to slow down. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you sensing? And as soon as you get that picture, you take this little corner of that picture and you blow it up into a standing ovation, or to a person nodding their head in front of you saying, yes, I agree, or to a person saying, you got it. What we're doing is we're changing it at the association level. It's a swish pattern. You see the imaging, you explode this little corner up into an image of a future state that you desire. In this case, I'm talking about a standing ovation because we're saying, not going to say And then you do that 4 or 5 or 6 times. Now, I will caution you. I don't like leading with the swish pattern. I don't think it's a panacea. It's not a fix-all. Saying is very, very contextualized. It's very narrow scope. The reason I caution people against using the swish pattern is because you don't know what's in these other associations. For example, we all have a self-control mechanism, and that self-control mechanism is at the association level. And if you start messing around with your associations, you could start screwing some things up. So use the swish pattern for and I would say maybe other speaking idiosyncrasies. For example, I had this is a personal example. Sometimes when I would speak, and I catch myself doing it every now and then, but here's how fast it works. If I breathe in through my nose, you could hear the breathing sound through the microphone because it's a narrow passageway, and the air has to have a higher velocity to get a deep breath in my nose. What I did was I used the swish pattern to breathe through my mouth. So instead of breathing through my nose, I breathe through my mouth. By breathing through my mouth, you can't hear it. I literally just switched that in. Now, how long was I aware of it? Well, obviously in editing, I used to get rid of it in editing, but so you see it and hear it in editing, post-editing. Just seeing it didn't change it. And when I did the swish pattern, it changed. When we get to the point of being, and then when we go through the 4 steps of doing and we have the be and the do in place, you literally can change habits with just awareness. So I did that. That was a while ago. Now I can change a habit like that just by awareness. Because the pot of spaghetti, those strands are no longer just randomly placed in there. They're placed in there in such a way that I can go from here to there just by being. We're not downloading everything new, but we're rewriting that pre-stimulus stimulus response cycle to one that's designed for their life that they're going to love living. So I'm going to stop it there. Next week we'll come in and we'll talk about the reaction step and the survival reaction, but we'll focus on this next step that happens in here, which is the pause, and how to build that pause in, because the conscious mind, so the unconscious, as I said, or the subconscious, has a reaction, or that stimulus reaction is about 200 to 400 milliseconds, so less than half a second. The conscious mind has a reaction time of about 500 milliseconds, so a half a second. So we have a space before the conscious mind comes online, and what we want to do is make the decision around the reaction before I have my response. So that's it. Remember, these episodes will be going behind the paywall. If you subscribe between now and let's call it December, I'm going to say December 7th or so, right now, 7th or 8th, that weekend, you'll automatically be upgraded into the annual mastermind in 2025. The mastermind community, where you get group coaching, you'll get access to all of the episodes, you'll get discounts on subsequent programs, you get member-only benefits, but it's a mastermind. Right now, the pricing on that is $9.97. I'll start webinars on it in December, And at that time, these will go behind the paywall. So I recommend you do that. It's a bargain. If you don't like what you see, you can look at all the episodes. If you don't like it, don't sign up. For the price of an annual subscription, you're going to get the whole 2025. Obviously, that deal won't be there 2025 for sure. I'm going to close it down either by that weekend, that second weekend in December, or once I fill up the spots that I'm allocating for that. So that's it. We will see you next week.